we are working on all of that to try to nail down where those cabinet members are in their thinking at this moment. But the point is here is that top advisors within the Trump administration have been so affected and in their thinking because of what has happened, the accumulation of events and the presence of personal behavior, that this has been discussed.
And Margaret, that's why I used the words constitutional crisis, because just as the President of the United States and the Commander-in-Chief seems increasingly isolated, there are reports about potential resignations by his national security staff and his vice president right now busy in the Senate and then soon the joint session of Congress to dispatch what is normally a perfunctory matter and is done very, very quickly, but instead is dealing with this. I have to ask you about some of the comments that we saw today, notably President Trump's former Defense Secretary, Jim Mattis, who had some very strong words for President Trump, saying Mr. Trump will deservedly be left a man without country.
That is just a punch to the gut for a commander-in-chief to be described as that, a man without a country. That is such a powerful statement by Jim Mattis, the retired four-star Marine general, former Secretary of Defense, and known for having a real power of inspiration among the rank and file, among the men who have served under him. So these words carry weight still, to the degree that there is moral authority left among some of the leaders who have spoken out time and again on key moments, such as what we saw happen during the summer with the protests in front of the White House that turned violent, and the president's decision at that time to go into Lafayette Square and hold up the Bible. That has inspired military leaders to speak out, but this statement tonight is unlike anything I have seen to date, Nora.
Margaret, stand by, because we have some breaking news right now. It involves the United States Senate. Let's go back to the live pictures there, because the Senate has voted 93-6 to smack down the challenge to his election loss in Arizona. Let's bring in Nancy Cordes, who covers Capitol Hill for us. And Nancy, that's a resounding rejection.
It is a resounding rejection, Nora, and it means that Arizona gets to keep its 11 electoral votes. Those will officially go into the count. It shows you how much this movement to challenge the Electoral College results has dwindled in the wake of the violence we saw today. Still 6 is not 0, which means there is still a possibility that any one of those 6 could choose to object again once the process gets underway to continue with the count and move on to more states. Why Arizona? Why were they objecting to the electoral votes in that state? Well, it just comes early in the alphabet. It's an A state. It's the first battleground state that was won by Vice President Joe Biden, that came up as they were going through these states alphabetically, and so that's the one that they objected to. But it isn't the one they have the most issues about. They're upset about Georgia. They're upset about Pennsylvania. So the question now is whether these senators like Josh Hawley of Missouri, Roger Marshall of Kansas, will feel that they have made their point, they have said what they have had to say, they've gotten on record, and now they're going to call it a day, or whether they're going to feel compelled to go ahead and challenge the results from yet another state like Georgia when the counting resumes.
Right, and of those 6 objections, 2 of them, Senator Hawley and Senator Cruz, I'm thinking of the notable because they are both senators who have presidential ambitions 4 years from now. They also listened to the remarks of Mitt Romney, who received applause from fellow senators, when he also, though, suggested that those that continue this are complicit in the violence, right?
That's right, and he's not the only one who is criticizing the 2 of them obliquely this evening. Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey was also on the Senate floor calling them out for fundraising over this challenge that they've lodged, even as the unrest was mounting outside the U.S. Capitol. So they're getting a lot of side eye tonight. They're being pushed very strenuously by Republican leaders to drop this challenge. It's become an embarrassment in the eyes of Republican leaders at this point, who say it's not going to go anywhere, and who argue, Nora, look, if this were to be successful, if you took it to its logical end, and the 11 electoral votes of Arizona were to be thrown out, you'd be disenfranchising millions of people. And on what grounds? There is no serious, credible allegation of electoral fraud in Arizona. The votes were certified by that state's Republican governor. And so it's a really unusual movement that has grown in strength over the last couple days, now is dwindling. But because it only takes one Republican senator and one Republican House member to keep this going, we could be in for a long night.
And Nancy Cordes there on Capitol Hill, as America's lawmakers have been consumed by a day-long debate by a mob attempted takeover of the Capitol, instead of the fact that nearly 300,000 Americans are dead from coronavirus, or that millions of Americans who want a vaccine to protect themselves against this virus can't get a vaccine, who want direction from either the federal government or from their representatives to help with the process, to move along the process so that their parents and grandparents and those with comorbidities can get a vaccine. And yet Congress seems consumed by a process with a preordained outcome that President-elect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be the next leaders of the United States of America. And thus it continues the difficult work of democracy. Want to return now to the state of our nation's capital, not just what's happening in Congress, but on the streets, because there are still those tens of thousands of angry mobsters who were at the U.S. Capitol are now roaming the streets of D.C., despite the fact that there is a curfew here. CBS's Chris Van Cleve has been on the Mall and outside the Capitol all day. Chris, you were an eyewitness to the thousands of law enforcement that tried to remove and push back that angry mob. What's happening now?
Well, Nora, certainly the area around the Capitol has turned very quiet. You can see the National Guard is still here. The mob, the crowd, largely gone, almost entirely gone at this hour. The city is under a curfew. We know that as of 9:30 tonight, D.C. police have made at least 30 curfew violation arrests. We saw a handful of people taken into custody in front of us here earlier. And part of the reason why the Capitol grounds are so quiet, basically in every direction you look, you're going to see flashing police lights. You can see over there, one of the intersections nearby, blocked off by police cars. There are emergency vehicles just circling the footprint of the Capitol here. And we'll show you why. Let's show you a little bit of video from earlier today as people forced their way inside the Capitol. They were met by that lone Capitol police officer who tried to stop them. He was forced to retreat until some long seconds later, other officers appeared to assist him. In another part of the Capitol, protesters were in a hallway when a gunshot rang out. A woman was hit. Police officers drew their weapons to provide cover as people started CPR. Unfortunately, that woman later died. On the House floor, as rioters were storming the building and moving that way, members donned protective gear and were evacuated by police. We spoke with Representative David Trone.
There was a gas mask pre-placed under every other seat in the chamber. So we put the masks on. We heard pounding on the door at the time. People are outside the doors but could not get in. And then they exited us all out to some side entrances, which were heavily manned by Capitol Police, and then down some elevators and through the complex where we are now, just in a holding pattern.
And now, just a few blocks from the far side of the Capitol sits the RNC, and we want to show you some video there. The Republican National Committee. The D.C. bomb squad was summoned there because what appeared to be two improvised explosive devices, they looked like pipe bombs, were found there. The bomb squad rendered them safe. A search throughout the day then turned up a vehicle nearby. Inside there were weapons and ammunition. That investigation is still going on. Unclear if the two are related, but that's happening outside the Republican National Committee headquarters, just a few blocks from the Capitol. You know, one of the big questions, Nora, and Jeff touched on it earlier, the police presence here. When we got on scene, before things got out of control, There were not a lot of police officers. The police presence was notably low, and this is not a town that is, this town is used to dealing with demonstrations, and normally there would be road closures and significant police presence. That didn't happen until after things were out of control. Nora?
Chris Van Cleve, thank you so much. And that concern about the lack of law enforcement was certainly noted by members of Congress who were seen scurrying through the Capitol, some of them on their hands and knees, as armed guards fought back the mob who was trying to make their way onto the House and Senate floors. Joining us now is Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, a Democrat from Washington State. She was above the House chamber as the mob stormed the Capitol. And Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. Would you first just describe the scene for us?
It was really like something from some other country, not the United States. We were in the gallery just above the chamber. There were about 12 of us members there. And suddenly we heard, probably before the people on the floor heard, the noise of people breaching the Capitol. We saw it on our Twitter feeds and social media and from alerts, but we could hear it. We could hear people screaming, shouting. We heard, what sounded like a big, angry, violent mob. And then we noticed that Speaker Pelosi was being taken off the floor. Steny Hoyer was being taken off the floor. There was a brief suspension. We thought maybe things would be okay. But pretty quickly, all of the members on the floor were ushered off through the side doors, as was described. But those of us that were in the gallery, just above the floor, were essentially couldn't get out. And so we put on our gas masks and we were told to immediately drop to the floor. The floor by then had been cleared, but we heard shots being fired, I guess, into the chamber. They sounded like they were right there. And we saw the Capitol Police, now the only ones on the House floor. We could see them. They had barricaded the doors with furniture, with other things, and they were standing about 6 to a door around the door with guns drawn. To try to stop anybody who continued to fire through. So I think
we're seeing the pictures right now of you actually up in the gallery witnessing that, and we could hear, it almost seemed like you and your colleagues praying.
Yes, Lisa Blunt Rochester began praying, and she was right next to me, Sheila Jackson Lee.